All right, we're gonna do something new today, right now. I guess there's a lot of people asking questions, and I don't know what they are. So I am going to answer the question that Nick says. I get a lot. Nick, I feel like I need a camera on Nick right now so you can see Nick. But there is a Nick back there. And if you've been watching my YouTube channel, you know there's a Nick back there. Nick's gonna ask me the question. I have no clue what it is, and then I'm just gonna take a minute to answer that question for you.
How did Heidi Powell meet Dave Hollis?
How did Heidi Powell meet Dave Hollis?
When?
And when? That is actually the question that has not yet been answered anywhere in the world, and I'm gonna tell you today. I am. Dave, sorry Dave, you're not gonna watch this. You got too much stuff to do.
We're rolling.
Oh, we are. Oh my. Anyway, please, we cannot roll. So I actually I learned who he was through social media when Chris and I were already going through our divorce. So this was it was October 2019. Chris's and my divorce started in August 2019. Only because, and the world did not know, Dave did not know, nobody knew that Chris and I were going through a divorce. He had actually reached out and said, hey, he had commented on some of my stuff, very nice guy, commented on Chris's stuff. And then he had reached out and said, hey, I'm coming out with a book in March. If there's any way you could read a copy, the galley copy, and make an endorsement for me, that would be super amazing. And I said, sure, of course. He had sent me a video message over Instagram, and it was a nice thing. He sent me the book. Like, this is just what happens in our world.
He sent you a video message?
Yeah. So this is the thing. This is the thing, though, that influencers do to each other. So then we know that it's not an assistant on the other side of the DM, because sometimes a message that's sent is an assistant. So this is how I become friends with a handful of them, where I usually won't respond because I'm like, oh, it's just an assistant. But when it's a video message, it's like, oh, it's him. And I didn't even know Dave. I thought it was super nice. He sent me the book. I was too nice to say no. And so I wrote him his endorsement for his book.
Did you read his book?
One chapter. I read one chapter. To this day, I've read one chapter of Dave's book. And what's funny is when I read through some of the interactions that we had, I was like, your book is amazing. Bold-faced lie. I mean, the first chapter was really great. It was really great. So ended up sending that. His book came out in March, or was coming out February, March. This is right before COVID had started. But February, we reconnected again because he had posted my testimonial on Insta, and he tagged me, and I said, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Congratulations, this is a big deal, because Chris and I had a couple books come out, and it's a really big deal. And our conversation was one text back and forth. Great, blah, 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 happy to know you. And then he replied and said, hey, we would love to have you and Chris on Rise Together podcast. He said, I don't know if you know my wife, Rachel, and I, which I actually didn't know much of Rachel at all, but he said, we have a hit podcast. It gets 10 million downloads, blah, blah, blah. I mean, huge numbers. If you and Chris would want to come on, we would love to have you in person if you can come out to Texas. And because this is before virtual. And I was like, yeah, let me talk to him. And I never got back to him after that, because I was like, Chris, there's no way you and I can go on a podcast with another dynamic duo. Like in Chris's eyes, and the feedback we get is that Chris and I were relationship goals. I'm like, and they were in their own right relationship goals to the world's eyes. And so my fear was, if I go on, there's no way I could tippy-toe around the questions that they would ask without actually lying. So I never got back with him at all, because I thought, gosh, if we go on, we would have to either one, tell them that we're divorcing, which I was not ready at that point in time to tell the world that I was going through a divorce, or two, we'd have to lie, because they would say, hey, how do you work together and make it work? Like, how do you work so well together? And the truth is, we were working terribly together at the time. So that was kind of the end of, Dave and I having any communication. There was very little. And then May 21st arrived, and that is when Chris and I decided to announce our divorce publicly. And life was, just going on for me as normal. And then about a week and a half later, I was so shocked when I opened up my Instagram to see that Dave Hollis and Rachel Hollis were also getting a divorce, which was like, I knew nothing about them, but the very little that I did know, it was crazy, because I do remember a couple times when Chris and I were going through, after Dave and I had connected, I would show Chris their stuff online. I'd be like, look how they work so well together. Like, I actually would say, why can't, because Nick, listen, true story, you were there for all of our shoots. And the shoots were some of the hardest times for me and Chris. And this is something the world doesn't know. And you got to witness the literal, like, okay, we got to break down set for an hour and a half while Chris and Heidi go figure their crap out. Yeah. Right. And I actually would see them shoot videos together, and I would show Chris and say, look how well they work together, which is, to me, like, then seeing that they're going through a divorce was such an eye-opener to me, that like what you see isn't always real. Now, what Chris and I delivered on camera, and you know this, Nick, was real, but like, you didn't get to see all of the real. You didn't get to see, now looking back at videos, I look at some of them, I'm like, oh my gosh, if someone didn't watch this video and say they're getting divorced, I'm like, they're crazy, because there was tension there. So all of that to say, they had, I saw their message. I was sent by Susan, someone that works with me, both of their podcasts immediately after, Dave's and Rachel's. And for some reason, I just had an idea in my head. It was not right, but I had an idea in my head that he left her. I don't know why. I just had listened to tone, and I think it was there was whatever had been said. I just thought that she had, and so I actually sent her over direct message, a message about that long. Because in my relationship, there's no wrong. I've left one marriage, and one marriage left me. So I'm not offended either way. But in my marriage with Chris, I was technically the one that did not choose to leave. And so I actually felt bad for her. And I sent her this big, long message over direct message, and she never saw. I don't think she's seen it to this day. But Dave, I sent him a message too, because he and I had a connection. I'd never talked to her, but my message to him was like, I'm so sorry for all you're going through. Hope you're well. That was it. Like, because in my mind, I thought this guy that I don't know and I have no desire to get to know and I don't want to date, I just was not in the place to want to date, and I didn't think he would be the kind of person I would date.
Really?
No, I didn't. Had no clue. And I think a lot of it is because when I was outside of a marriage with Chris, where I was in the fitness industry, so maybe I automatically thought that's who I was supposed to be with somebody that was in the fitness world with, I don't know, I just didn't really like, and I also didn't know that I ever wanted to be married again. So the level of interest in a relationship was like a -2 for me, and not because of him, and I didn't know anything about him. So he was the one, he replied back and said, yeah, it's been a crazy couple months, or a crazy month. Thanks for the outreach. That was it. And I, kind of a thing. And then he sent whatever he sent. I sent a message back to him and said, hey, just so you know, this is why Chris and I this is why I ignored you, because we've been going through this for a year. We didn't want to tell the world. We felt like it wouldn't be a good idea. And I think this was a couple weeks later, like 4 weeks after he had announced, then he had said, totally understand, no harm done. Hey, if you're ever in the mood to podcast about divorce, let me know. If you're ever going to be in Texas. And I'm like, crazy enough, I'm going to be in Texas. So I was flying out to go meet with Donald Driver for some business stuff that Donald and I were doing at the time in Dallas, like a week later. So I responded to Dave and said, I'm actually going to be in Dallas in a week, so I can hop a flight over to Austin, stop by. We can podcast about divorce, because talking about the things that are hard is the most therapeutic for you. And that's kind of what we had both agreed, and he was like, listen, we can press record. And if it's a crapshoot, then we're going to delete it, or we can edit anything out, but let's at least try to record a podcast. So I showed up at his house on, are you ready for the date? July 19th, 2020 was when I showed up at Dave Hollis's house. We had not even had a phone conversation. It was just over text. Noah was asleep, taking a nap. His kids were away at camp. And I remember pulling up in his driveway, and I remember seeing him come out of the house to greet me, and right away I'm like, damn, like he's actually attractive. I was so serious and focused. Eye on the road, which I did not expect. I don't know why, probably because I just wasn't looking for that. But he, I thought
taller than you thought?
I thought he was 5'8". And maybe it's because I was married to Chris, who was 5'8". Dave is 6'4", and then hair. So Dave's like 6'5" and a half.
Oh, he's that tall.
He is so tall. So tall. And so I could tell he wasn't in a happy place. He was just, you could tell he was hurting. And so I walked up and I'm like, how you doing? And he just was like, not good. Not good at all. And we walked through the house. He took me to where we were going to podcast. I think he actually gave me a tour of the house first because he was trying not to cry. He was trying to get his mind off of talking about what we were talking about. And when we finally settled in the chairs that we were going to podcast in, he could not get through one sentence without breaking down crying. And it was really, really a rough thing. And so I felt like, okay, I am this person who's been through a lot. I've been through a divorce where I did choose to end a marriage. And then I went through a marriage where even though it maybe wasn't good for either of us towards the end, for the last half of it, I would have stayed in forever because I did not want to have another I didn't want to deal with the things that come with divorce. I didn't want split family. I didn't want to run kids around in I didn't want the stigma of being a twice divorced mom or woman. And so I understood where he was coming from. They had been married or together at least for 19 or 20 years. And for him, he's like a forever kind of a person. And so just kind of helping him, I didn't even really help him. All he really needed was an ear and me giving him my feedback or hearing him and then giving feedback and assuring him that everything was going to be okay. It turned into a 3 or 4 hour conversation. And at one point he was like, what are we doing? I need to turn on the podcast mic. And I'm like, you're crazy. You're not podcasting today. Neither am I. He's like, I feel bad. You're in Texas. And I'm like, I don't even care. It is totally okay. So it just was a great therapeutic conversation between the two of us. That was nothing. There was no flirtation, not even close. There was just healing and not even the slightest. It was like there was relatability, like we had common ground. There were a lot of aspects of who we each were in our last marriage that we could relate to with each other. And sometimes all you need in a place of darkness and hurt is to not feel alone. And we both had that. Like we didn't feel alone. Yeah, that's the word, solidarity. And so that's kind of how I actually remember leaving and I had called my publicist, Molly. Do you know Molly? And we were talking about something. I think I had told her I'd shot the podcast didn't happen because she cared because she's my publicist. And she was like, oh my gosh, you are going to marry Dave Hollis in the car. And I'm like, no, like not even close. And it was so funny though, but that like stuck because I was like, I just didn't find him. I wasn't in a place. He and I did not find each other attractive in that way. And he sent a really great thank you, a kind text that, next day or that night. And then it led to like one text a day. I checked in, I think a couple days later, and then he would check in on me. And
ladies and gentlemen,
I'm a natural.
You are a natural.
I'm a natural. That has not caught a fish. Turned into a friendship that then turned into him inviting me to dinner. And like, I guess it was a couple weeks later. And we created a really incredible friendship over distance that I think could not have been created if we lived close to each other. It's just not true because, it wouldn't have been possible any other way. Yeah.
I think that's a good place to stop.
We don't want there we go. No more. You're done.
We can find out more later.
Yes. Like the color of the shirt he was wearing. I do remember that. I remember what I was wearing. Not this video. I'm not telling you anymore. We're done here. Come back next time.